The European Central Bank has a problem, and its name is Tether. Every dollar of USDT printed isn't just a stablecoin, it's a vote against the euro, a buyer of US treasuries, and a quiet extension of American financial power into every corner of the global economy. Christine Lagarde knows it, the European Central Bank board knows it, and over the last 18 months, they've been building something most people in crypto haven't even realized. A regulatory weapon designed to do one thing: break the dollar's grip on stablecoins before it's too late. MiCA was just the opening move. What's coming next is much bigger, much more aggressive, and aimed straight at Tether's heart. So in this video, I'm going to break down Europe's secret war on the dollar, why Tether is ground zero, and what it means for crypto on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm DC, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. Let's start with a number that broke Europe's patience: 98%. That's the share of the entire stablecoin market denominated in US dollars as of May 2026. The total stablecoin market is now sitting at around $322 billion. Tether alone accounts for roughly 190 billion of that. But here's the part that actually keeps Christine Lagarde up at night. Tether's reserves now hold approximately $141 billion in US Treasury exposure. That makes Tether the 17th largest holder of US government debt on Earth. Larger than South Korea, larger than Germany, just to name a few. A private company headquartered in El Salvador with no banking license, holding more American sovereign debt than most G20 nations. So every time someone in Lagos or Buenos Aires or Istanbul buys USDT to escape their local currency, that pile gets bigger. Now extend that logic to Europe. Every euro a European citizen converts into USDT is a euro that leaves the European banking system and gets reinvested into US treasuries. It strengthens the dollar, it funds the American government, and it weakens the ECB's grip on its own monetary policy. Lagarde said it directly on May 8th. Europe faces, in her words, a future of digital dollarization and a loss of monetary sovereignty. That's not regulator speak, that's a declaration of war. So what does Europe actually do about it? They built MiCA. And on the surface, MiCA looks like the standard regulatory framework. Reserve requirements, licensing, consumer protection, the usual stuff. But once we look closer, we will start to see the Trojan horse. MiCA classifies USDT as an electronic money token denominated in a non-EU currency. That triggers two specific mechanisms. First, the issuer has to maintain at least 30% of reserves inside EU credit institutions. Tether CEO Paolo Arduino has flatly refused. He's called the bank deposit requirement a systemic risk creator, pointing out that concentrating reserves in fragile EU banks is exactly the opposite of safety. So Tether never even applied for a MiCA license. Second, and this is the part nobody talks about enough, Article 23 imposes a hard cap. So if a non-euro stablecoin exceeds either 1 million transactions per day or 200 million euros in daily transaction volume inside the EU, the issuer must immediately cease further issuance. Let me repeat that. Cease issuance. That's not a fine, that's a kill switch built into European law specifically targeting dollar-denominated stablecoins. And the consequences are already visible. Coinbase EU pulled USDT for European users in March of last year. Binance delisted USDT and 8 other non-compliant stablecoins from EEA spot trading the same week. And Kraken put USDT in sell-only mode. Crypto.com restructured through Malta and dropped it entirely. By Q2 2025, USDT trading volumes on EU venues had collapsed by more than 70%. USDC walked into the vacuum and nearly doubled its EU volumes overnight. And the final hard cutoff, the day every remaining loophole closes, is July 1st, 2026. That's 6 weeks from when this video goes live. But MiCA is just phase 1. The real endgame is the digital euro. And here's where most analysts get the digital euro completely wrong. They look at it and ask, why does Europe need a CBDC for consumer payments? Europeans already have SEPA, contactless cards, and instant transfers. The retail use case is weak, but that's because retail was never the point. The digital euro isn't about replacing your debit card, it's about owning the rails of tokenized finance before private dollar stablecoins do. The ECB is building two pieces of infrastructure that almost nobody on crypto Twitter is paying attention to. The first is called Pontes. It launches in September 2026 and it links distributed ledger platforms directly to the ECB's target settlement system. To put it simply, it lets tokenized assets settle in central bank money instead of USDT or USDC. The second is called Appia, targeting full implementation by 2028. A roadmap for a fully interoperable European tokenized financial ecosystem. And the retail digital euro pilot kicks off in the second half of 2027 with a full launch targeted for 2029. ECB board member Piero Cipollone said it bluntly in March. Without tokenized central bank money, sellers of tokenized securities are forced to accept payment in assets they're not comfortable holding. Translation: if you want to do serious finance in Europe at scale, you're going to do it on the rails the ECB controls, not on rails that Paolo Arduino prints from El Salvador. Now compare that to what America just did. Because while Europe was tightening the screws, the United States went the exact opposite direction. On July 18, 2025, President Trump signed the Genius Act into law, the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. It mandates one-to-one backing in cash or short-term U.S. treasuries. It creates a federal licensing framework through the OCC, and it treats issuers as financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act. It also does something genuinely strategic. By forcing every regulated stablecoin to back itself with US treasuries, the Genius Act creates permanent, structural growing demand for US government debt. So, the more USDT and USDC circulate globally, the more treasuries get bought. Galaxy Research estimates this could compress T-bill yields by 3 to 5 basis points by 2030. Across trillions in debt, that's billions in saved borrowing costs for the US government. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called it a once-in-a-generation opportunity to cement dollar supremacy. That's not a man hiding the agenda. So Europe restricts dollar stablecoins to protect its currency, while America turbocharges dollar stablecoins to extend its currency. Two superpowers, opposite playbooks, same battlefield. And caught right in the middle is Tether. Which brings us to the real question. Why is Tether specifically the target and not Circle? Well, because Circle plays nice. Circle got an EMI license from France's ACPR in July 2024. USDC and EURC are fully MiCA compliant, fully listed on regulated EU exchanges. Circle does monthly Deloitte attestations, and they filed for a US IPO which now trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker CRCL. Tether does none of that. Tether's headquarters sit in El Salvador, deliberately offshore, deliberately outside both EU and mainstream US enforcement reach. Tether uses BDO Italia for quarterly attestations, not fully audits. Paolo Arduino has publicly mocked the digital euro project. He's refused MiCA, refused the bank reserve requirement, and built what he calls a resilience stack. AI infrastructure, decentralized communications, Bitcoin mining, and gold reserves. What many don't know, Tether is now sitting on roughly 154 tons of gold and 7 billion in Bitcoin alongside that 141 billion in treasuries. And the company posted over 10 billion in net profit in 2025, 1.04 billion in Q1 2026 alone. That's more profit than most listed European banks make in an entire year. With no shareholders, no dividends, no regulators it has to answer to. So for the ECB, Tether is the symbol. If they can break Tether, they can send a message to every stablecoin issuer on the planet. Compliance with European framework isn't optional. If they can't break Tether, MiCA looks like a paper tiger and the digital euro arrives to a market that's already moved on. Now we have to zoom out one more layer because this isn't just about stablecoins, this is about the architecture of money in the next 50 years. The dollar's share of global central bank reserves fell below 57% in 2025. The lowest level since 1995. BRICS nations are openly building parallel payment systems. Russia and China now settle 90% of bilateral trade in local currencies. BRICS Pay is targeting full operational deployment at the New Delhi summit this September. But here's the paradox that defines the entire conflict. While BRICS governments push de-dollarization at the state level, BRICS citizens are quietly adopting USDT at the individual level. 90% of Peru's $28 billion crypto market flows through dollar stablecoins. Tether reports 570 million users. The dollar is losing the institutional war and winning the retail war at the same time. That's why the BIS calls this digital dollarization. That's why the Bank of France has labeled USDT a ticking time bomb for European monetary sovereignty. That's why this month, Italy's finance minister called US stablecoin policy more dangerous to Europe than tariffs. And that's also why European regulators didn't celebrate the sanctions enforcement when Tether froze $344 million in USDT linked to Iran in April. They saw something else entirely. They saw a private American-aligned company demonstrating it could weaponize the European accessible internet dollar without any European involvement whatsoever. No SWIFT, no correspondent bank, no EU sign-off, just a freeze. That's the moment the gloves came off. So what does this mean for crypto? Circle is the structural winner on both sides of the Atlantic. MiCA compliant in Europe, Genius Act aligned in the US, and the only major issuer with a regulatory moat in both jurisdictions. The Quivalis Consortium, 12 European banks including BNP Paribas, UniCredit, BBVA and ING launches its institutional euro stablecoin in the second half of this year. That's the first serious bank-backed euro token at scale. Société Générale's EURCV is already moving into regulated DeFi via Morpho. PayPal's PiUSD is scaling against 400 million users. The losers are clearer. USDT is being walled off from regulated European liquidity. DeFi protocols built on USDT pairs face structural friction in Europe. Smaller European exchanges, roughly 18% of them, are expected to shut down or exit by year-end under MiCA compliance costs. And the catalysts to watch over the next 6 to 12 months are very specific. July 1st, MiCA hard enforcement. July 18th, Genius Act final implementation rules. September, ECB Pontus launch and the BRICS Pay rollout. Tether's first ever full KPMG audit ongoing. The Foreign Stablecoin Transparency Act sitting in the US Senate. And of course, the November US midterms, which Tether's own head of government affairs called a seismic test for everything the Genius Act unlocked. Track those signals. They will reshape this market because this isn't just a fight over stablecoins, it's a fight over who controls the next version of money. The ECB knows that whoever owns the rails of the digital currency owns the next century of global finance. And right now, those rails are being laid in dollars by a company headquartered in El Salvador holding more US treasuries than most countries combined. And that's not a situation Europe is willing to accept. So expect the pressure on Tether to escalate. Expect the digital euro push to accelerate. Expect the friction between MiCA and the Genius Act to harden into open regulatory conflict, and expect crypto to get caught in the middle of the biggest currency war of our lifetime. So the question isn't whether this conflict reshapes the stablecoin market. It's how fast it goes and who's left standing. If you've got value from this, please leave a like, a comment and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC signing off.